Today we are going to take hopefully the final part of climate change. And like I told you in the previous class, we are going to do COP26 and we are going to do effects of climate change. So if you look at your surroundings, and particularly we'll focus on India, we'll do a little bit of the world also. So if you look at the flash floods which took place in Chamoli in the beginning of the year, or if you look at the flash floods which took place in Kedarnath and the landslides subsequently, then these are not actually acts of God like people claim they are. They are man's race against nature in its quest for development, because we feel that development should be the hallmark of a civilized society. Having said that, if you look and observe closely, we've had flooding almost throughout the year. So in this month itself, Chennai, previously Mumbai, before that Hyderabad, along with Bangalore, and then of course Chamoli in the month of February, and Himachal Pradesh too. If you look at all of these are significant indicators of climate change. The Himalayan system is made up of almost 15,000 glaciers, and these glaciers are moving at the rate of 100 to 200 feet every decade. Because of the global warming, they are rapidly melting, and as a result of this melt, you had the glacial downpour in the monsoon months in 2013, when so many people, about 6,000 people, lost their lives in Kedarnath. I want you all to know that today's class is entirely made from newspaper cuttings and from net information, which is also newspaper. So I have not consulted any book for it. Reason being that I think that climate change has become too global a phenomena to be read in books. It is more to be experienced by all of you. So having said that, let us move forward. That it was in 2003 when the continent of Europe was hit by a heat wave, resulting in the death of almost 70,000 people. The forest fires that you see in the Amazon, I think it was 2019. Yes, it was in July 2019. And then again, the bushfires in Australia. And there's a province called Queensland in Australia. And these are called bushfires because the forest there becomes absolutely dry in the summer months. And because it's in the southern hemisphere, they have summers when we have winter. And it is one of the continents which has a Christmas which is hot. So the fire started in 2019, December for Australia, and they went on till March, April, and were very difficult to put out. So all these are suggestive of climate change. The United Nations Environment Program, or what you call as the UNEP, the UNEP, in its emission gap project report, in its emission gap project report, stated that as a result of climate change, there has been an extreme cold wave which is being witnessed by Texas in this present year, that is in 2021, resulting in tremendous snowfall. About 4 million people were deprived of electricity, and about 6 to 10 people lost their lives. Now, for us in India, a loss of life in terms of 6 to 10 is not much. But just to remind you that in the foreign countries, life is really precious and is really valued. And when we'd gone for a training program in Singapore, I think we went in 16, 17, and there was only one single death in the Singapore railway system in the year 2010. And we had visited Singapore in 16, 17, and they were still so taken up by that one death. So the loss of life of about 6 people in Texas and about 4 million going without electricity is big news for America. So much so that the COVID centers had to be closed down because of the rapid snowfall. Now, this is due to the heating up. And I repeat, yes, it is due to the heating up of the Arctic Peninsula area. It is due to the heating up of the Arctic Peninsula area. If you remember, when we spoke about ozone depletion, I had spoken of polar vortex wind. Now, these polar vortex winds, from when they start from the month of August and go on till October, November, these cold winds hold on to the cold which is generated at the poles. But as a result of global warming, gaps have come into this wind system, resulting in the spread of cold towards the continents or towards the latitudes or temperate latitudes. And that is why Texas has experienced this brutal cold wave. India is considered, if we talk of India, India is considered as the third biggest emitter of carbon dioxide. It is the third biggest emitter of CO2 after China and the USA. China goes carbon neutral in 2060. Japan and South Korea, and because we are concentrating on Asia, we are talking like this. Japan and South Korea, of course, others are going carbon neutral in 2050. Japan and South Korea go carbon neutral in 2050, and India goes carbon neutral in 2070. What do you mean when you say that you go carbon neutral? Or what do you mean when you say that there are going to be zero emissions? It doesn't mean that carbon is not going to be produced. It only means that carbon is going to be sequesterized, means it is going to be able to sink in proportion to its production. So if we are going to emit about 1 billion of carbon dioxide, it's just an estimate, please don't take it on any other value. To give you an example, if we are going to emit 1 billion carbon dioxide in terms of emission, we should be able to utilize that full emission, resulting in a net zero. I repeat, when we talk of zero emissions, we do not mean that carbon is not going to be produced. Carbon is going to be produced, but it is going to be fully utilized so that there is no change in the atmospheric system. Furthermore, what we would like to add in terms of climate change is that the HSBC ranks India. HSBC in 2020 ranks India first in terms of India first. These are some statistics. Please take them.
Of course, the truth is from their viewpoint. With those blind men in Jainism, the part you touch is what is your reality. So all the NGOs are making their own, these are all NGO organizations. They're all working with the United Nations Environment Program. So they have their reports which are considered to be relevant. So there is nothing wrong in quoting data from these. So HSBC ranks India first as the most vulnerable in terms of climate change. And this is amongst 67.
Sorry, ma'am. Voice is not coming.
Amongst 67 countries.
Sorry, ma'am. Voice is not coming.
Is it coming now?
Yes, ma'am. थोड़ा सही हुआ है.
Vulnerable amongst the 67 nations
which are exposed to climate vulnerability. Now, the German Watch, and this is among 67 countries, the German Watch NGO, the German Watch NGO ranks India the fifth among 181 nations in terms of climate risk. In terms of climate risk. So HSBC finds India first in terms of vulnerability to climate change, and German Watch ranks India fifth among 181 nations to climate risk. What does that mean? It means that India is one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change. That is one thing which you need to keep in mind. The World Bank says that World Bank in its report says in 2018 that about 800 million people, I repeat, 800 million people are going to be affected, by climate change in South Asia. So World Bank has estimated in 2018 that about 800 million people are going to be affected by climate change in South Asia. And when it talks of South Asia and Southeast Asia, they cannot talk of anybody except India and China, parts of China, but mostly India. Having said that, the emissions gap report 2020, the emissions gap report 2020 says that in this last decade, that is in the last 10 years, that is from 2010 to 2020, they are the five biggest emitters. The five biggest emitters are the USA, China, India, the European Union 27 plus UK. And if you remember that when we talked of COP26, it had said that 70% of the carbon cover has already been utilized by the G7 countries, which includes, of course, the USA, it also includes France, it also includes Germany. So these are one of the biggest emitters of the world, and they have utilized 70% of the carbon cover for this century. However, right now the emissions gap report has found that 55% of the emissions in this decade have occurred from USA, China, India, the European Union 27, and UK, because UK came out of the EU. Now, why do you think this kind of a scenario is happening in our country? In our country, there is a lack of consistent policy. There are no stringent measures against people who indulge in environmental degradation. In fact, the government itself is supporting such projects where the forests are getting very badly affected. So we can talk about Panna, we can talk about the Sariska Wildlife Sanctuary. We can also talk about the Chandrapur area and the area in Karnataka where big mining projects are being taken up inside the tiger reserve. These will come under when I'm going to teach you the ecosystems and biodiversity, then we will be roughly touching upon them. Although if you look at my previous lectures, I have covered it in great detail. We do not use a very effective monitoring system to plug in the loopholes. The environmental impact assessment reports of every project are just an eyewash. Well, if it was not for that, this water system project that you see, the connectivity between water and land, or the waterways project, which India is coming up in a big way, is going to be one of the biggest polluters of the environment in times to come. Even the highways which are being constructed, and there is a proposal to now construct a highway between Bombay and Delhi, and that in itself will be taking a lot of huge forest cover. The Parliament building, which is coming up in Delhi, that has completely eroded the green cover which you used to see at the gateway when you used to go. So if we look at the effects of climate change, we can go point-wise as 1. Rise in temperature. Rise in temperature, COP26 says that the temperature on the Earth's surface has risen by 1.1 degrees centigrade as compared to the pre-industrial level. There is a rise in sea levels and melting of glaciers. There is an increase in precipitation, that is rainfall. This carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has increased by 25%, 25% CO2 since 1958. And if you look at from the industrial revolution, from the time of industrial revolution, then it has gone up by 48%. There is an excessive flooding on planet Earth. That is again an effect of climate change. Excessive flooding. There is an effect on food supplies. There is an effect on food supplies and agriculture. Okay, these 6 points are there. There's a rise in temperature, 1.1 degree according to COP26. Rise in sea level and melting glaciers, increase in precipitation or rainfall. There's a 25% in CO2 emissions, not emissions. There is a 25% in the quantity of carbon dioxide present in the atmosphere since 1958. And if we look in terms of the industrial revolution, the increase is 48%. There is excessive flooding. There is an effect on food supplies and agriculture as a result of climate change. And then, of course, human health. And it is said that about 250,000 people have lost their lives only due to rising pollution. And in times to come, all the vector-borne diseases, waterborne diseases like malaria, like dengue, which you can see for yourself, diarrhea is going to affect a large scale of people in times to come. Then this will be the 7th point. And then the 8th point is loss of biodiversity. Loss of biodiversity and ecosystems. There is a general degradation of the ecosystems and loss of biodiversity. So what are we now going to conclude? That as a result of climate change, there are extremes of temperature. So it's going to be very hot. You have something called the heat islands being formed, where in a city, an area gets so warmed up, it gets excessive rain. This is happening a lot in Mumbai. So there are extremes of temperature, extreme cold, extreme hot. There's an excessive flooding. Then there's extreme drought in some cases. There's melting of ice glaciers. So according to a UNEP report, what are the various effects of climate change on each of the continents? So we start off first with North America. If you look at North America, the report says that in the coming decade, as a result of climate change, there is going to be a decrease in snow cover. There's going to be a decrease in snow cover in the Western Mountains. In the Western Mountains. There is going to be a 5 to 20% increase in rain-fed agriculture. Increase in rain-fed agriculture. 5 to 20% increase in rain-fed agriculture. There is going to be heat waves, increase in frequency and intensity. Increase in frequency and intensity. This, students, I'm talking about North America. Okay, now you come to South America. We come to South America and Latin America. South America and Latin America. And this is where you have the Amazon forest. So what happens to the Amazon forest? It says that the east part of the Amazon forest, the east part of Amazon forest is going to completely become savanna land. So what is savanna? Savanna are grasslands. These grasslands are there. The term savanna is used for the grasslands in Africa actually. Otherwise, they are known by grasslands are known by different names in different countries. So they're called the prairies in North America. They're called the downs in the Australia. And here in Africa, they call the savannas. In South America, they're also referred to as savannas, and they have. So we'll just take it as a generic name for grasslands, savanna. Okay. So the Amazon forests are now going to convert into the savanna grasslands. Not only that, the level of biodiversity is very high in the Amazon forest. So the level of biodiversity, water availability, agriculture, and human consumption patterns are going to be badly affected, are under threat. Okay? This is for South America and Latin America. Then we are going to talk of Africa in 2020. What will happen in Africa in 2020? We're talking of 2020. So imagine 2020 is gone and we are in 2021. So this report says that in Africa in 2020, about 75 to 250 million people are going to face what is called water stress. What is water stress? It's the scarcity of water. So unavailability of water within 3 to 4 kilometers for people in a particular area is a kind of water stress. You're walking and there is no water. So about 75 to 250 million people are likely to face water stress in Africa. Then there is going to be 50% reduction in rain-fed agriculture. There is going to be a 50% reduction in rain-fed agriculture. So like you must have heard that in Somalia, in Botswana, there has been huge amount of cases for hunger and malnutrition because food is not easily available in these areas. In Europe, they say that the interiors are going to experience what is called flash floods and inland flooding. So you had this case right now in where? In which country? In Germany. You must have read about it, that the Danube was having a very high rise in water levels and there was massive flooding in Germany and inland flooding. Along with that, there will be an increase in sea erosions and coastal areas will be affected. And if we talk of Asia, when we are going to talk of Asia, we are going to say there is going to be a loss of fresh water availability. So you're going to experience more droughts. Fresh water availability is going to be reduced. By 2050, the coastal areas are at a big risk. Coastal areas are at a big risk. The death rate will increase. Death rate from, and this is the dilemma. The death rate from droughts and rains or floods is going to increase tremendously. So the death rate from droughts and floods is going to increase tremendously. These are some of the effects that you are going to witness in the other continents. And so this is the world view that we take off, that we are going to understand about climate change. Now we come to COP26. So COP26, India goes into COP26 and states that at the outset that it is going to go carbon neutral in 2070. So it says that in 2070, India goes carbon neutral. But even before it goes carbon neutral, it has put certain decadal goals, means certain goals which it is going to achieve by the end of the decade, which means 2030, which are actually going to be the hallmarks of India's green success story. So what do I mean by that? That this goal is of 2070, which is very far off what India has emphasized vis-a-vis its goal in Paris in 2015, and then to the Prime Minister was Shri Modi, but he has taken and upgraded his contributions to reductions in carbon emission and his commitment to 2015 Paris Agreement, and some of our goals have changed as a result of it. So India has set out for achievement of 5 goals at COP26, out of which the first goal of carbon reduction or carbon neutral by 2070 is the most ambitious and far-fetched, but the 4 goals that we need to achieve by the end of the decade are the more important ones, and these include. So we will come to 2017 later. The first we will mention is that first goal for India is that a renewable ramp up. And this is the heading which the UNEP report has taken. So you please put it like this only. So there is a renewable ramp up in which India sees that it is going to now draw half of its, India is now going to draw half of its energy requirements from renewable sources by 2030. So in its renewable ramp up means to increase. So in its renewable ramp up, the country states, or the Prime Minister states at COP26, is that 50% of the country's requirement of energy is now going to come from renewable sources. To understand that, first let us see what are our energy sources at present. At present, we take up electricity by burning coal. Our need for fuel in transport and in other industries comes from petroleum. In cooking, we are using natural gas. So it is said that all these are now going to be replaced by renewable resources, and by 2030, our consumption of renewable resources in the production of energy is going to be 50%. So we are cutting down on fossil fuels, including coal, by 50%. If we look at India's diagram and consumption patterns, this will become easier for you to understand. So it's like this. This is coal, which is 44%. Okay. This is your renewables. And this is just 3%. We are using oil, which is like 25%. We are using biomass like 13%. And your natural gas is 6%. And others is 9%. Others is 9%. So coal is 44%, oil is 25%, biomass is 13%, 3% is the only renewables, and 6% is your natural gas, and others are 9%. It means that at present, energy in our country is used up to 75% is from coal, petroleum, and natural gas, which means we are a fossil user-based country. So if we are a fossil-based user-based country, to gang it up or to ramp it up to 50% is a big task for a country like India. All right. So 44% for coal, 3% for renewables, 6% for natural gas, others 9%, 13% biomass, and oil 25%. Please keep this in mind. This should be a part of your answer. It is very, very important. So the first and foremost goal for India is ramp up of renewables. Ramp up of renewables, which I just now do. Now, the second goal which we have to achieve, these are all 2030 decadal goals, means decade end goals. Decade end goals. Okay, so ramp up of renewables, I just told you, by 50%. So 50% of our energy is going to come from renewable sources. The second is that we are going to be reaching 500 gigawatts of energy from non-fuel sources, non-fossil sources. And what was the goal in 2015 at the time when we were signing the Paris Agreement? At that time, our country had committed of energy consumption patterns from renewals only up to 40%. So we have upped it by up to 50%. That's why the ramp up renewables. So from its goal of 40% energy consumption of renewables, we have now committed to 50% of utilization of renewable energy. The second is reaching a 500 gigawatt of energy production from non-fossil sources. So our power capacity, if you look at our power capacity as such, our power capacity at present from non-fossil sources. And what are the non-fossil sources? Your non-fossil sources are your nuclear energy and your hydroelectricity. So our present power capacity is at 53 gigawatt of energy is being produced from hydroelectric sources, and from nuclear sources. So the country now claims that by 2030, we are going to do something so magical that we are going to produce 500 gigawatts of power production from non-fossil sources. Now, why does it become very important here is because at the Paris Convention, our country had committed to 450 gigawatts of production of energy from what it called the renewable sources. It had not used the word non-fossil. It had used renewable. Now, as a result of using non-fossil, it means that main focus of attention will now shift to hydroelectric projects and will also focus on nuclear energy. Our third goal is going to be emissions intensity. What is the emissions intensity? In its emissions intensity, the country commits that it will reduce emissions. It will reduce emissions intensity per unit of GDP, and you have to use this language that the intensity emission, which means that how much of carbon dioxide are you going to use per production of your GDP. So that's the simple thing, but please use this language because this is the accurate language. So the reduce emission intensity per unit of GDP. This has to be copied just like this. Reduce emission intensity per unit of GDP by 45%. By 45%. By 2030. By 2030. Reduce emission intensity per unit of GDP by 45% by 2030. अभी हम लोग का कितना emission का rate है? It is 24% of our GDP. ये याद रखिए. और पहले जब हम पेरिस गए थे तो हमारा कमिटमेंट क्या था कि हम 33 से 35% तक का इमिशन रिडक्शन करेंगे पर जीडीपी. पर अभी हम क्या कमिट करके चले आए कि हम इसको 45% तक रिड्यूस कर देंगे बाय 2030. So this is again one decadal goal that we have reached. Another buzzword is 1 billion tons. So India claims that by 2030 it is going to reduce carbon emissions to the extent of 1 billion tons. It is going to reduce carbon emissions to the tune of 1 billion tons. So this CO2 emission cut will be coming chiefly from the railway network system. The railway network system uses or emits about 60 million tons. 60 million tons of CO2 when it runs its engines either on diesel or it runs its engines on electricity, which is coal fed. So with the electrification of almost all railway lines, all railway projects, this emission is going to be reduced by 60 million tons. And this is again a goal to be achieved by 2030. And the last, of course, is that we are going to be net zero by 2070. So to achieve this 1 billion ton of reduction, the railway network system is going to be electrified, which will control some 60 million tons of CO2 emission. Along with that, we are going to be using green hydrogen as a fuel. We are going to use green hydrogen as a fuel in petroleum, refinery and fertilizer. In petroleum refinery and fertilizer. This is also going to be mandatory. So almost all petroleum refineries, except for the ones which are owned by Ambani, everything is owned by the government. So petroleum refinery and fertilizer units of the government of India are soon going to be run on green hydrogen, which again has no emission effects. Along with this, the Minister for Power says that every industrial unit is now going to have a green fuel unit, which means that some part of its power production or utilization is going to be environment friendly with no carbon dioxide emissions. This has already been put in place. Plus, what are we going to do? We are going to ensure that there are electric charging points in almost all petrol pumps. At present, our car consumption, electric car consumption is only 0.1%, 0.1%. And we want to increase it to almost 50% to achieve our targets of 1 billion reduction in 1 billion ton reduction in CO2 emission. So this part you will have to learn by heart. All right. Then of course we talked about one sun, one world, one grid, which India and the UK have proposed along with the International Solar Alliance and with the Green Grids Initiative. So what is the Green Grids Initiative? That day I remembered after the class was over that I had not mentioned what is the Green Grid Initiative. So the Green Grid Initiative is not any organization. The Green Grid Initiatives are those governments or the countries of those governments which support the one sun, one world, one grid concept. So these countries include, of course, the United Kingdom. It also includes France and it includes Australia. So they are coming forward in a big way to support this program. In the steering committee for this initiative, which is there, you have countries from Africa, you have countries from Latin America who are also going to give their input. In fact, China is one of the biggest research supporters for this One Sun, One Grid, One World initiative. And along with that, the Cambridge University, the Oxford University, the World Bank, the Asia Development Bank, the African Development Bank are all going to be there for this concept. And Modi ji claims that ISRO, that is our Indian Satellite Remote Sensing Organization, is going to, our Indian Space Research Organization is going to ensure that we will be capable of calculating how much of solar energy is present at a particular location. So the initiative which is taken by India will then be supplied and supported by other countries. And this is the way forward. And I'd already told you about the various phases in which this One Sun, One World, One Grid initiative is going to move forward. So this is again one of the claims for COP26. And it was a major part of the COP26 meet when it happened. Now we want to talk about what India has done. So far so good for COP26. India goes for renewable energy up to 50%. By 2030, India goes up to 1 billion ton of emission reductions of carbon dioxide. India goes up to and claims that 500 gigawatts of energy, of power is going to be generated from non-fossil fuels. And India says that it goes carbon neutral in 2070. These are some of the claims of our government. And so we look forward to the green initiatives up to 2030 and how it is going to take place. Then there was the whole concept of One Sun, One World, One Grid. And other than that, India took a very humanistic viewpoint and started speaking for those very small islands, which now need a huge input in terms of adaptation, since they have already become victims of climate change as a result of the rising sea levels. So we are talking of islands in the Pacific, we are talking of the CARICOM Islands, we're talking also of Maldives. These islands have been, their cause has been taken up by our Prime Minister, and he launched an initiative on the second day of COP26, trying to mitigate the losses of these islands. So under what is now called the CDRI. The CDRI. And he talks about the launch of infrastructure launch of infrastructure. God, don't go by these spellings, you will lose big marks. Okay, launch of infrastructure. Launch of infrastructure for resilient ये आपका प्री का भी क्वेश्चन है और आपके मेन का क्वेश्चन तो है ही है because this can come as a short form. They might ask you what is the concept, so please be prepared for it. This is now on the 2nd of November. So on the second day of COP26, launch of infrastructure for resilient island status. It is also called the IRIS. Infrastructure for resilient island status. This series has been proposed by India. And it is for the small island developing states. It's for the small island developing states which are facing the biggest threat. So earlier on, India had propagated what is called the coalition. Earlier on, India has been one of the biggest supporters, and in this coalition, there are other countries also. It's being financed by the UK. Australia is one of its biggest supporters. Even the Quad countries, if you must know, Japan and the USA are both supporting this coalition. So this coalition for disaster. Coalition for disaster resilient. Coalition for disaster resilient infrastructure. Coalition for disaster resilient infrastructure was a program which was proposed earlier and propagated by India in a big way, financed by the UK, supported by Australia and also the USA and Japan. Under this initiative, what is really happening is that whatever adaptations to climate change have to be made in these countries are being done under this program. As a part of this Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, India has now come up with the concept of IRIS, which is your infrastructure for resilient island status. It is nothing big. All that India is offering is that it is opening a window through ISRO, which is going to monitor when a cyclone is going to strike these islands, or when are they going to have a likely coastal invasion in terms of rising sea levels. So any kind of environmental hazard that these islands are going to be facing is going to be monitored by ISRO. As a result of this, they will be able to help the states or these island countries to understand where to invest and what kind of infrastructure to build so that they are better prepared for climate change. So what are we actually talking about? If you look back, when we did the disaster management classes, we had said that ISRO was monitoring and making us prepared for disaster management. So what IRIS is actually doing is doing the work of disaster preparedness for all these Pacific and the CARICOM islands, including Mauritius. So the small islands which are facing threat from climate change and rising sea level are coming under the program which is called the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. And as a part of it, you have this concept of infrastructure for resilient island status, under which India is giving ISRO's good office to monitor the physical parameters of these islands so that they are prepared for a disaster. One, two, they know what kind of infrastructure to build in order to adapt to the climatic catastrophe. This is again a part of COP26. There is a big talk that at COP26, India and America were not on the same page. Reason being that earlier also, the Secretary for Environment from the US had visited India even before COP26, but they couldn't resolve the issue. So now, although it is a part of international relations, it needs a mention that India and America are trying to come together in the face of threat that they face from China. However, both have fought on the World Trade Organization forum for solar panels. And as a result of it, whose products has flooded the market? China. So they both, means India and America, fought on the forum of the WTO regarding the construction or the building up of solar panel or manufacture of solar panel. And while they were fighting it out, China flooded the markets with solar panels and has taken the lead there. It is said that in future, another transitional energy usage comes from a product called ethanol. Now, India itself has protected trade of ethanol from the US. US and Brazil are the two biggest exporters of ethanol in the world. And should India tie up with America, it is said that with its own ethanol bromide production, India, US, Brazil can lead the world in terms of ethanol export. And this is one of the biggest foreign exchange earners for our country. So it is being proposed that environment can be a big way of exchange between the USA and India in the face of the Chinese hegemony. And should that happen, it will be a better state of affairs for the development in our country. Now, TERI claims, which is the Energy Renewable Institute of India, it claims that we are going to need about 60,000 crores a year to go about with our ambitious decadal goals of 2030. And out of those 60,000 crores, we are at present deficit in 48,000 crores. Now, if we are deficit in those 48,000 crores, how are we going to make good of those 48,000 crores? So, Modi ji has spoken of the differential responsibility, common but differentiated responsibility, and told the OECD countries, if you remember, Kyoto Protocol, that they have to give $100 billion in terms of climate mitigation and climate adaptation. However, that has not come through, but it has been said that in COP26, it was decided that between 2019 to 2025, these OECD countries are going to support the climate change adaptation programs in the developing world. This is one of the proposals. But for a country, for us, that is with a deficit of 48,000 crores per year, and 48,000 crores we are thinking of today. We don't know what will happen tomorrow. So 48,000 crores per year is going to be made good by a proposal called RED. What is RED? And now it's not just RED, it's RED plus. It's RED plus. So we are at present having only 12,000 crores per year to mitigate our ambitious goals of 2030. So for the 48,000 crores deficit that we have, we are going to make good from forest conservation efforts like agroforestry. We are also going to try and control emissions, carbon emissions from deforestation and degradation of forests. And that is what RED is all about. So if you look at the full form of RED, it is reducing emissions. It is reducing emissions reducing emissions from deforestation, and forest degradation. तो आपके पास सब चीज के लिए पैसे नहीं है, तो इसको आप कैसे इंप्रूव कर सकते हैं? इसको आप अपनी जो स्ट्रैटेजीज है या गवर्नमेंट की स्कीम्स है उसके थ्रू, आप अपने बिहेवियर के थ्रू ये कार्बन एमिशंस को कंट्रोल करेंगे. तो रिड्यूसिंग एमिशंस फ्रॉम डिफॉरेस्टेशन एंड फॉरेस्ट डिग्रेडेशन, ये किसने प्रपोज किया था? This has been proposed by the UNFCCC and the Conference of Parties. This concept, reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, is a UNFCCC COP proposal. And now it has become RED plus. So when we say that it has become RED plus, what does it include? Along with this, it also includes one, conservation of forest. Conservation of forest carbon stock. So what we have, we preserve. Okay? What does it mean? Conservation of forest carbon stock, it means that what we have in forest, we should preserve. It also includes sustainable management of forest. Sustainable management of forest. It also includes enhancement of carbon stocks. तो हम 2030 तक अपने ambitious goals according to टेरी, जो हमारा एनर्जी रिसर्च इंस्टीट्यूट है, उसके मुताबिक अगर हम रेड प्लस सिस्टम अपनाते हैं या रेड प्लस का कॉन्सेप्ट अपनाते हैं, तो हम अपने कार्बन एमिशंस अपने बिहेवियर द्वारा, अपने स्कीम्स द्वारा कम कर सकते हैं. अब इस स्कीम में क्या इंक्लूड होगा? रिड्यूसिंग एमिशंस फ्रॉम डिफॉरेस्टेशन एंड डिग्रेडेशन. ये सिर्फ रेड था. जब इसको हमने रेड प्लस किया तो हमने इसमें क्या इंक्लूड किया? कंजर्वेशन ऑफ आवर प्रेजेंट कार्बन स्टॉक, जो हमारे पास अभी है वो हम रखेंगे. सस्टेनेबल मैनेजमेंट ऑफ फॉरेस्ट, वो हमको करना ही पड़ेगा. एंड इनहांसमेंट ऑफ कार्बन स्टॉक्स. And this concept has been given by UNFCCC and the Conference of Parties together. This is one way to manage our goals of 2030. Now we come to the last point for today's class, which is your ocean acidification. We should do ocean acidification and finish climate change. अब ocean acidification क्या है? The carbon dioxide which is present in the atmosphere is absorbed by the water bodies, including the oceans. This absorption of carbon dioxide by the water gets converted into what is called the carbonic acid. The carbonic acid affects the pH level of the water, resulting in what is called ocean acidification. I repeat, the carbon dioxide which is present in the atmosphere is absorbed by water. When it is absorbed by water in excess, because it is present in excess in the atmosphere, so it's getting absorbed in excess by the oceans. So the carbon dioxide which is present in the atmosphere is absorbed in excess by the ocean, resulting in the formation of carbonic acid, which affects the pH level of the ocean water, resulting in acidification. And this is called ocean acidification. Ocean acidification gets more vulnerable or more strengthened because of two other factors which combine with it. So one is called your ocean heating up. So when the ocean gets more warm because of the rise in global temperatures, along with ocean deoxification, which means that the oxygen level in the water is getting reduced. These three together are affecting the marine ecosystem in a big way. And this is one of the effects of climate change, which I wanted to mention separately, other than ozone depletion and greenhouse gases, because it needs a mention. It affects the livelihoods of a number of people. It affects our tourism industry. It also affects the marine life which is present in the seas. So as a result of ocean acidification, the marine life over a period of time and its diversity is going to change. So first and foremost, ocean acidification results from CO2 absorption by water, forming what is called the carbonic acid. This carbonic acid affects the pH level of water, resulting in acidification. This is happening due to excess of presence of CO2 in the environment and excess absorption by the sea waters. Ocean acidification as such has happened only because of the increasing CO2 levels in the atmosphere. As a concept, as a natural phenomenon, it has been there since 300 million years, but it did not affect the acidity of water. Reason being that whatever carbon dioxide was absorbed by the water was neutralized by the oxygen which was present there. But now, just like every other ecosystem, the ocean is not able to keep up with the excessive carbon dioxide which is being absorbed by the water. As a result of it, the marine life is affected, and you have the concept of coral bleaching. Coral bleaching is in the corals which are formed in the sea, which are deposits of calcium carbonate. They have a symbiotic relationship with the algae. The algae is the one which gives color to the corals. As a result of ocean acidification, this symbiotic relationship gets damaged, and the corals themselves throw out the algae from within themselves, resulting and becoming white. And that is why the corals become bleached. Not only do the corals become bleached, the growth of calcium carbonate because of the presence of carbonic acid is not possible. And so you have marine creatures like the mollusks, which are getting affected and are not being produced in the oceans anymore. So oysters, mollusks, coral reefs, all are getting affected due to ocean acidification. And like I told you, the fisheries, the fishing industry, the ocean floors because of the lack of oxygen, and the shorelines are getting eroded as a result of this acidification. So these are some of the effects of ocean acidification. So like I said, that the trio of ocean warming plus ocean acidification and ocean deoxygenation. Deoxygenation is combining to alter the marine life or the marine ecosystem permanently. The heat, which is your global warming, and if its effects on ocean, plus the acidity, plus the lack of oxygen, have altered the sea life forever. For the ocean to stay pH neutral, what we need is about 320 to 350 ppm of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. This ppm is in parts. ppm, 320 to 350 ppm of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. What do we have it at present? At present, we are having 420 ppm of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, resulting in this acidification. And what was the pre-industrial level? The pre-industrial level was 280 ppm of carbon dioxide. So if we aim for 320 to 350, the acidification can be controlled. But I don't know if it's possible, but people are saying that they are going to try for it. So like I said, this affects formation of calcium carbonate, CaCO2. It also affects corals, it affects mollusks, and it affects your food chain. So it becomes a threat to food security for all those who are dependent on the sea for their livelihood and food. It also leads to increase in erosion and inundation. Erosion and inundation. Then, like I told you, it results in the concept of coral bleaching, where the corals throw out the algae with which they are in a symbiotic relationship and become completely white. So what is these are the effects of it. So what is the solution? Solution is, of course, of reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, carbon neutral, whatever you have been taught so far, everything is true for controlling ocean acidification. But of course, the most important is CO2 emissions need to be reduced. Your greenhouse gases need to be reduced to control global warming. Then there is something called an organization which is called Ocean Acidification International Reference Closer Group. इसको प्लीज आप ऐसे लिख लीजिए. Oceanification International Reference Closer Group. Alright, so this is OAIRUG. This is user group. Okay, Ocean Acidification International Reference User Group. And what does this is under the United Nations? And so what does it do? It tries to monitor the acidification in the oceans and formulates policies of how to go about adapting to the climatic changes. That is its only role. And IUCN, World Conservation Congress, IUCN World Conservation Congress has given in 2016 has given the goal of reduction of acidification by 30% by 2030. So overall ocean acidification needs to be reduced by 30% by 2030, that is by the end of this decade. And this has been promised by the IUCN World Conservation Congress in 2016. That brings us to an end of this class. It also brings us to an end of climate change. I don't know what happened. I hope my voice has been clear. Today we have gone a little fast with a lot of data, a lot of stuff. If you look at the previous year's questions, you're going to find about 15, 16 questions on climate change. We've done a major chunk of this. If there's anything which you people need to know, please put in your remarks. You can also talk to me on the group. I will be available for that. If you need any other data, I will be giving it to you. And if you want our concepts of combating climate change for India, it is those 8 points which need to be done. And for us, only that part is relevant. Thank you so much.